Dear friends, welcome to my channel. Stay here for a while, close your eyes and relax, and fall asleep slowly in my stories and the sound of rain. ASMR, soft-spoken love story, where the light fell through. Bedtime romance. I hadn't set foot in the chapel for nearly 50 years. And yet, the moment I stepped through the old wooden door, the air smelled exactly the summer-cedar and candle wax, mingled with something softer, almost sweet. Memory, maybe. The pews were worn now, their polish dulled by time and quiet prayers. The floor creaked beneath my sandals as I walked slowly, almost reverently, down the aisle. And then there it was. That window. Oh, my dear friend Have, you ever seen light that could make you cry? That window, made of faded blues and blooming reds, golds that danced like fire, and greens so deep it made your chest ache, it caught the morning sun just right. Even after all these years, the light still fell the same way, painting the floor in soft, holy colours. I sat in the second pew, the same one I used to. My fingers traced the grain of the wood, remembering every scratch, every groove, as if they were old scars on my own body. I let the silence wash over me. This place had waited for me. Isn't that strange? To think of a building waiting. But I believe it did. I closed my eyes. The echoes of laughter, whispers, a boy's voice soft with secrets, they stirred around me like the dust in the sunbeam. You know, I always thought I'd come back with him, or maybe not come back at all. But life has a way of surprising you, of pulling you away, and then tugging you right back when you least expect it. I was 17 that summer, that impossibly warm, slow summer when everything felt endless. I was restless, dreamy, a little lost, and maybe that's exactly why I found him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Isn't that what memories do? They jump ahead, then circle back like a song stuck on repeat. I suppose I should start at the beginning. Not the beginning of time, of course, just the beginning of our time. You see, my aunt lived in this quiet little town. She still does, actually, though her memory isn't quite what it used to be. That summer, my parents sent me to stay with her. Said it would be good for me. Clear your head, they said. Get away from the noise. Well, they got their wish. The town was nothing but stillness. A bookstore that smelled of mildew, a lake that shimmered like glass, and this chapel, always this chapel, sitting like a forgotten jewel at the edge of a hill. I never expected to find love there. Not at 17. Not in a place so quiet, it felt like it belonged to another century. But I did. And now, decades later, I was back. Alone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but still legible. His handwriting, sharp, slanted, with little loops at the tops of his T's. I had carried it for so long, tucked into old books and drawers, as if keeping it close might keep him close too. I hope you still see the light, it read, because it's still yours. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I looked up at the window again, watched the colours shift across the stone floor. and I whispered his name. Just once. Like a prayer. Would you believe me if I said the light flickered then? Just for a second. As if it remembered too. And that's where it begins, my friend. With a girl, a boy, and a window that saw it all. 17 is a strange age, isn't it? You're old enough to believe you understand everything, but not yet wise enough to know how much you don't. That summer, I carried a heart full of noise and no clear direction. My parents thought I was too sensitive, too moody, too quiet for my own good. So they sent me to stay with Aunt Marianne, hoping fresh air and silence might fix whatever they thought was broken. Aunt Marianne lived in a cottage covered in ivy, tucked at the edge of a sleepy countryside town that seemed untouched by time. No streetlights, no traffic, just one dusty bookstore, a lake that mirrored the sky, and that chapel on the hill like a secret too sacred to speak aloud. She welcomed me with lemonade that was too sour and a hug that smelled like lilacs. "We'll find something for you to do," she said. "There's a summer reading group at the bookstore, and the lake's only a short walk if you want to swim." I nodded, trying to appear grateful, but truthfully, I was already counting the days until I could go back to the city. But something happened on the third day. Something quiet and soft, the way summer things always begin. I woke early, before Aunt Marianne stirred. The cottage was hushed, filled only with the sound of birds and the creak of old wood. I took my sketchbook, though I hadn't drawn in weeks, and wandered down the narrow road. Something about the morning felt like a whisper calling me forward. That's when I saw the chapel. Or rather, remembered it. It had always been there, perched on its little rise like a quiet watcher. I'd passed it the day before, but hadn't really seen it. Not until that moment. The door was open. Not wide, just enough to invite curiosity. I hesitated at first. What if someone was inside? But I stepped in anyway. And just like that, the world changed. The stained glass window caught the morning sun and threw it across the stone floor in hues I didn't know light could carry. Blues like the deep end of the lake, golds like honey warmed by a fire, and reds that pulsed like a heartbeat. The silence wasn't empty, it was alive, full of breath and memory. And there, sitting on the far side of the pews, was a boy. His back was to me. He sat on the floor with a sketch pad, pencil moving fast and loose across the page. His hair was messy, the colour of chestnuts, and he wore a worn grey shirt that looked like it had known many summers before this one. I stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or leave. But before I could decide, he turned. Just slightly. Enough for our eyes to meet. He didn't say a word. Just looked at me like I wasn't a stranger at all. Then, with the smallest nod, he turned back to his drawing. I didn't stay. Not that day. I backed out quietly, my heart pounding. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. All the way the light had wrapped around him like a story. The next day I went back. Not to find him at least. That's what I told myself. But there he was again. Same spot, same sketch pad. And this time he looked up and smiled. Just a little, but enough to pull something loose in me. I sat a few pews away, opened my sketchbook. My hand hesitated above the page. Then, slowly, it moved. The first line crooked, the next unsure, but they came. As if the light itself was drawing through me. My dear, have you ever felt like the world paused just for you? That the air held its breath while you found someone you didn't even know you were missing? That was the summer I was 17. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. I don't remember the exact moment I started going to the chapel every morning. It wasn't a decision, you know. Not like saying, today I'll go there and sit in the light and maybe catch a glimpse of him again. No, it was gentler than that. Like waking up and following the scent of something warm. I'd slip out before Aunt Marianne brewed her coffee, before the town began its lazy stretch into morning. The path to the chapel was already becoming familiar stone fence on the left. That cluster of yellow wildflowers by the bend, the birch tree that always dropped a leaf or two onto my shoulder like a secret greeting. And then there was the door, always ajar, always inviting. He was there most days, always sketching, always quiet. Sometimes he'd glance up and offer the kind of smile that doesn't stretch wide but sinks deep. Other times he didn't look at me at all, and that strangely made me ache more than I could explain. I started calling him the boy by the window in my mind. I didn't know his name yet. Isn't that funny? How someone can become part of your rhythm before they even have a name. The stained glass window was the heart of it all. I know I've said this before, but truly, my dear, have you ever seen light bleed like watercolour? It didn't just shine through that window, it lived through it. The glass wasn't a single picture like most stained windows I'd seen. No saints, no angels, just a cascade of broken colour arranged in a sweeping spiral. Red bled into amber, cobalt swirled into violet, and in the centre clear glass, like a window inside the window, framing the world outside. Trees, sky, the flicker of birds. I asked Aunt Marianne about it one night, over mismatched plates of buttered peas and roasted chicken. "Oh, that old thing," she said, wiping her hands. No one knows who made it. Been there longer than the chapel, some folks say. Legend goes the builder found it half buried in a field and built the church around it. She chuckled. Romantic, isn't it? Romantic. Yes. That word stuck in my chest like a pebble dropped in water. It was on a Tuesday when he finally spoke. I was sketching the pews badly, I should say, and cursing the way the perspective kept slipping when I heard his voice. Low, like it had been dipped in dust. "You hold the pencil too tight," he said. I looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" He grinned, the kind of grin that made you feel like you'd already shared 1,000 inside jokes. "You're choking it. That's why the lines shake." "Oh," I muttered, embarrassed. Didn't realize I had an audience. You didn't, he said. I just noticed things. That was the beginning. Just a few words. But they cracked open the silence like a window in spring. His name was Eli, short for Elijah. But no one called him that, not even his mother, he said. Too heavy a name, he told me once. Like wearing your grandfather's boots when all you want are bare feet. He lived with his uncle on the edge of town. Painted houses in the fall for money. Read more than anyone I'd ever met. And, as it turned out, he'd been sketching in that chapel for 3 summers already. Why this place? I asked one morning when the sun was particularly golden. He didn't answer right away, just pointed to the light falling across the floor. Because it doesn't pretend, he said. It just is. Dear friend, have you ever met someone who speaks like their words carry shadows? That was Eli. Light and shadow in equal measure. I started drawing more. Sometimes him, sometimes the window, sometimes just how the light made me feel. I still have those sketches, tucked away somewhere in a box, marked old notebooks plus memories. One day, he showed me his. Pages and pages of faces and hands, windows and waves, and that spiral of colour over and over again, the window at every hour of the day. I'm trying to catch the way it breathes, he said. But I never quite get it right. You did, Eli. I wanted to tell him that even then, you did. But I was 17, and 17 doesn't always say what it feels. That window saw everything. Our silences, our smile, the mornings we sat so close we could feel each other breathe, and the afternoons we left without saying goodbye. Some places remember. That chapel, that window, they remembered us. Even now, all these years later, I can still feel the light on my skin. Warm, gentle, alive. And somewhere in that light, Eli, always Eli. The first conversation was about pencils. The second was about life. The third books, I think. Or maybe it was silence. With Eli, it was hard to tell where one thing ended and another began. Words flowed between us like the breeze through chapel window soft, certain, sometimes barely there, but always felt. The morning after he corrected my grip on the pencil, I came back with a stack of library books. Not because I wanted to impress him. No, not that. But because I suddenly wanted to know more about art, about stained glass, about the names of colours that weren't just red or blue but carmine, cerulean, saffron, indigo. He saw the books and raised an eyebrow. Homework? He teased. Curiosity, I replied, too quickly. He smiled like he was proud of me. We sat by the window. He sketched. I read. Sometimes we didn't speak at all, but there was never awkwardness. Just that quiet understanding that not all silences need filling. Do you believe in God? I asked him once. He stopped sketching, looked at the window, then back at me. I believe in light, he said. and how it finds a way in even through broken glass. I didn't know what to say to that, but I remember thinking, that's a better sermon than any I've ever heard. He asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. I don't know, I admitted. Sometimes I think I want to be an artist, sometimes a teacher, other times I just want to wander through bookstores and drink coffee. Maybe do all of it, he said. You don't have to pick just one life. That made something swell in my chest. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Like he believed I could. One afternoon, I brought music. A little tape player and a mixtape I'd made. Nina Simone, Leonard Cohen, some Vivaldi, even a few moody movie scores. I pressed play, and we sat listening while dust floated like golden snow in the window's light. He closed his eyes during one track. This one feels like a memory, he murmured. I remember watching him, then his lashes, casting shadows on his cheeks, the faint curve of a smile playing on his lips, and thinking, I don't want this to end. We talked about books next. He introduced me to poetry. Rilke, Neruda, Mary Oliver. I told him I liked stories that felt like slow songs. Like this summer, I said. He tilted his head. Yeah, he whispered. Like this summer? We began leaving each other little things. A drawing tucked into my sketchbook. A pressed flower between the pages of his notebook. A feather. A quote. A wrapped peppermint candy. We never said it was a game, but it was one. The kind that makes you feel known. I found myself laughing more. Not loud, open-mouth laughter, but the kind that bubbles up when something feels so right, it's almost funny. Once, I asked him what he thought of me. He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, You're like a window too. You let things in even when you don't realize it. I didn't know what to say to that either. So I just smiled. And I think that was enough. Later that week, he showed me a drawing he'd done of me, sitting on the pew, hair caught in the coloured light, face turned upward. You looked like you were listening to the glass, he said. And I was. Because sometimes, I swear, that window spoke. Not in words, of course, but in warmth, in light, in the way Eli's voice lingered in the air after he left. By then, I didn't need the books or music to go back. I went because he was there. Because the chapel had become our meeting place, our secret room in a world that kept spinning too fast outside. And every conversation, even the quiet ones, felt like another thread weaving us together. Not tightly, but delicately, like stained glass. Fragile, beautiful, lit from within. There's a rhythm to some summers, my dear, like the gentle lapping of water at the lake's edge, or the creak of chapel doors in the breeze. You don't notice it at first, but one day you realize your body and breath have fallen into sync with it. That's what happened to me and Eli. We didn't plan it, not exactly. But every morning, just after the sun started painting the chapel windows in golden rose, I'd walk through the old gate, heart ticking with a quiet excitement. And there he'd be always already there somehow, sitting with a sketchbook in his lap, pencil poised like it had never left his fingers. "Morning," he'd say, and it was the kind of word that wrapped around you like a warm sweater. Safe. Familiar. I'd slide into the pew beside him. Sometimes we'd speak right away. Other days we'd sit in silence, watching how the coloured light danced across the dust in the air, how it lit up the old wood until it glowed. Afternoons were for the lake. We'd grab sandwiches from the corner. Delia always got turkey. I liked egg salad and ride our bikes down the gravel path that curved past the edge of the forest. The lake wasn't much, just a quiet body of water with a crumbling dock and a few turtles that sunned themselves on logs. But to us, it was everything. He'd sketch the ripple. I'd lie back and stare at the sky. Sometimes, if it was hot enough, we'd kick off our shoes and wade in, laughing when the mud squished between our toes. We talked about everything and nothing. Favourite smells fresh oranges, old books, rain on pavement, dreams that felt too big to say out loud, regrets we hadn't lived long enough to earn, but somehow carried anyway. And when the sun started sinking, we'd go back to my aunt's house and sit on the porch with lemonade, letting the cicadas sing their endless song around us. Evenings became our time for sharing. Music, always music. We took turns playing songs, sometimes on cassette, sometimes just humming. He'd close his eyes and tap his fingers against his knee like he was painting rhythm into the night. One night, I brought him a book I love, a quiet novel with slow, aching prose. He read the first page out loud to me in that chapel the next morning, voice low and careful. I remember closing my eyes, letting his words and the light pour into me at the same time. We didn't call it love. Not yet. Maybe we didn't even know it was. We were 17. We didn't have the words, only the feeling, the way the world slowed when we were together, the way my hands knew exactly where to rest beside his, the way silence never felt empty. Dear listener, have you ever had a season like that? One that hangs in your memory, not because of grand gestures, but because of the everydayness of it all. The quiet rituals that become sacred without anyone saying so. That was us. There was a wildflower field just beyond the lake. One afternoon, we lay down in it, side by side, letting bees buzz around us, arms stretched wide like we were making snow angels in summer grass. If the world ended right now, he said, I think I'd be okay with it. I didn't say anything back, but I squeezed his hand. That felt like enough. We made up constellations, named clouds, spoke in inside jokes that no one else could understand. I think that's the real magic of young love or not the kisses or the declarations, but the language you invent just for each other. My aunt must have known. She never asked questions, just smiled gently when I came home later each night, smelling of sun and moss and something like happiness. Looking back now, I think we were building something fragile. Not a future, no, we were too young for that. But a memory, a moment. a capsule of time that would survive long after the rest fell away. And oh, my friend, if I could step back into any time in my life, it would be then. That summer, those days where the only plan was to meet him in the light, where every heartbeat felt like it had a soundtrack, and the world, for once, made sense, even if we didn't know what came next, even if the rhythm would one day end. There's a moment in every summer romance when the light shifts just a little. You don't always notice it right away. Maybe it's the way the shadows grow longer, or how a familiar smile falters for half a second. That's when I first felt it, in Eli. We were sitting on the chapel steps, passing a battered book back and forth, reading it line by line. I laughed at some absurd little sentence, and when I looked up, his face wasn't laughing with me. His eyes were far away, like he'd been pulled into some place I couldn't reach. "You okay?" I asked. He blinked slowly and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just lost in thought." That was the first crack. Dear friend, have you ever been close to someone so close, but suddenly felt miles away from them? That space opens up in silence, in the things unsaid. It was like standing in a house you'd lived in all summer, only to find a locked door you never noticed before. I started noticing small things after that. Times when he'd check the time and look unsettled. How he'd glance over his shoulder as we walked through the wood. One afternoon, I reached for his sketchbook, and he gently but firmly pulled it back. "Just rough stuff," he said quickly. "Not worth showing." But I'd seen a corner of the page. A fig or two, maybe. One looked like him, the other angry. And then, one day, I followed him. He left earlier than usual that morning. No chapel, no note. Just absence. My stomach twisted in a way I didn't understand yet, so I got on my bike and rode the path we usually took past the bookstore, the bakery, down the side street that led out of town. That's when I saw him. He was by the payphone next to the gas station, talking to a man. Not just talking, arguing. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he held his jaw tight, like he was swallowing every scream. The man was older, rough-looking, with a crooked baseball cap and tired eyes. At one point, Eli turned away sharply, fists clenched. The man grabbed his arm, and I felt frozen. Eventually, Eli yanked free and walked off, fast. I ducked behind the corner of the pharmacy, heart pounding. He didn't come to the chapel that day, or the next. When I finally saw him again, his eyes looked older, like he'd lived a few more years since I last saw him. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Sometimes when you're young and in love, you think that giving someone space is a kind of kindness. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's just fear. So instead I said, "You okay?" Again. And again he nodded. "Just tired." The next few days felt different. We still met, still sat by the stained glass window. But he stopped sketching. He'd rest his head back against the pew and close his eyes like he was trying to escape something that followed him even here. One night I couldn't sleep. The air was heavy with humidity and questions. I slipped out of bed, barefoot on the wooden floor, and looked at the moonlight pouring across the porch. I thought about him, about the man, about how little I really knew. You know, I think we assume love means knowing everything about someone. Their favourite colour, the songs that make them cry, the stories behind every scar. But maybe love is also about holding space for the things we don't know yet. The shadows they carry, the parts they're afraid to show. I wanted to be that space for him. Even if I didn't understand what haunted him. Even if part of me was starting to realise that summer might not last as long as I'd hoped. So the next morning, I met him at the chapel again. This time, I brought a candle. Just one. I lit it and placed it beneath the window. He looked at me, puzzled. "For what's unspoken," I said quietly. And for the first time in days, he smiled, really smiled. Not wide, not loud, but honest. And that felt like light breaking through a cloud. Little did I know, the storm was coming soon. The day the storm came was thick with heat. The air clung to everything, my skin, my breath, even my thoughts. The kind of day that makes you restless for no reason at all. I remember standing on the chapel steps, looking up at the sky, watching the clouds roll in like a slow brewing secret. Grey fingers stretching across the blue, thunder somewhere far off, like a warning whispered too softly. Eli arrived without his sketchbook. Just himself, in a worn-out shirt and damp hair curling slightly at the ends. He looked tired again, but not in the way that made me worry. More like he was ready to tell me something. We stepped inside just as the rain started. Not a gentle drizzlino, this was sudden, hard. A downpour that hit the stained glass like 1,000 quiet knocks. Inside, the air felt cooler. The chapel smelled of rain and old wood and beeswax. Eli lit 2 candles without a word. One for the window and one between us. Neither of us spoke for a while, just listened to the thunder and the candle's little hiss. The light cast soft shadows on his face, made his eyes seem deeper, more honest somehow. "I lied to you," he said eventually. My heart didn't skip. It stopped. I looked at him, but didn't speak. I let him unravel it himself. "I told you my dad was dead." He stared at the flame. "He's not. He just disappeared. Left when I was 10. Mom said he ran off to chase some stupid dream, left us with nothing but debt and excuses." He paused. I could see his jaw clench again, just like that day by the gas station. But he came back. His voice cracked. He found us this year. Said he wanted to make things right. Said he was clean now, had a job in another state. Wanted me to go with him. I blinked. "And your mom?" She told him to get lost. A bitter laugh. But he found me anyway. Keeps showing up, saying things that mess with my head. Part of me hates him, but another part. He trailed off. "It's okay," I said. It wasn't much, but it felt like all I could give him just then. Permission. Safety. He shook his head slowly. "You think you know what your life is going to be. You think if you just draw enough, or read enough, or hide in enough quiet places, you'll be safe. But the world doesn't care. It keeps knocking." Thunder boomed outside, perfectly timed. I reached for his hand. He let me hold it. Cold fingers, then warm. He looked down at our joined hands, like they were the first real thing he'd touched in days. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. He glanced up at me, eyes wet but not crying. "Because I didn't want to ruin this." He gestured at the chapel, at the window, at me. "You're the only part of this summer that makes sense." Silence. Not awkward. Not empty. Full. Then he leaned in. Slowly, as if asking without words if I'd still want him, this messy, hurting boy with too many shadows. And I did. Not because he was perfect, but because he wasn't. Because he trusted me enough to show me the crack. I rested my forehead against his. We stayed like that, breathing in the scent of candle smoke and petrichor, the world outside washing clean. "You don't have to go with him," I whispered. "I know." He didn't say more than that, but the way he said it made me hope. The storm outside began to soften. Drops gentler now, like the chapel itself was exhaling. I didn't know then how short our time really was. But that night, in the flickering candlelight, I believed in us. I believed in the light through the glass, even if the sky beyond it was grey. It didn't happen like in the movies. There wasn't music playing, or stars falling, or some perfect line that made our hearts leap. Nor kiss happened quietly, softly, like a secret being told with closed eyes. It was 2 days after the storm. The air was clearer, cooler. Everything felt washed clean. You know how sometimes, after a storm, the sky looks like it's been peeled back fresh and blue and wide enough to start over? It was like that. We met in the chapel again. No thunder this time, just sunlight spilling through the stained glass like it missed us. Eli was already there when I arrived, sitting in his usual place near the third pew, the coloured light painting his shirt in soft reds and blues. He looked up and smiled, but it wasn't his usual crooked grin. It was quieter, something more like peace. "Hey," he said. I sat beside him, close, not touching, our shoulders nearly brushing. I could feel the warmth coming off his skin, like the sun itself had been living in him. We didn't talk much. He opened his sketchbook, showed me something he'd been working on. It was the window, but instead of drawing the light coming through, he'd drawn it glowing outward, as if it was shining from within, as if the light belonged to us. "You're good," I said gently, running my fingers across the edge of the page. "Too good to hide." "I don't want to hide anymore," he said. And then, like the wind knew something was coming, It pushed a soft breeze through the open chapel doors. It made the candles flicker, made the light dance across our faces. And then he turned to me. His eyes searched mine, not for permission, but for recognition. Like he was making sure I was still the same girl who met him on a summer afternoon, in a chapel full of dust and dreams. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded. "Yeah." My voice caught. "Yeah, I am." And then he kissed me. Just like that. No build-up. No fireworks. Just the gentle press of his lips against mine, and the smell of candle wax and old wood, and the stained glass light spilling over us, like we were holy. Dear friend, have you ever had a moment like that? Not dramatic, not loud, just true. A moment so quiet and real that it stays with you, curled up in some corner of your heart for years? That kiss-or only Kiss felt like that. Like a forever tucked inside a heartbeat. He didn't say anything after. Neither did I. We just sat there, leaning against each other, watching the dust spin in the golden air. But I felt it. Something shifting. Something moving toward goodbye. I didn't know what exactly, but I could sense it in the way his hands trembled slightly when he closed his sketchbook. I wanted to ask him what's wrong. Are you leaving? But I didn't. I was too afraid the answer would break the moment. So I kissed him again, lightly, like punctuation at the end of a sentence I didn't want to finish. Outside, the day went on. The wind picked up. Somewhere far off, a train passed through. But in that chapel, under that window, time folded in on itself. And for a little while, we lived inside a memory we hadn't made yet. There are moments that only last a second, but stay with you forever. And then there are words silent, printed on paper that don't fade even after decades. His letter was like that. I didn't find it right away. In fact, I didn't even know I was supposed to. It was tucked inside the back cover of a book I'd borrowed from him. A worn copy of Siddhartha, if you can believe that. He said it had changed the way he saw the world. I'd taken it with me that afternoon. We hadn't planned to meet. I think we both felt the weight of something unspoken after the kiss. We needed air, or time, or both. That evening, sitting in my aunt's creaky attic room, with the slanting light pouring across the floorboards, I reached for the book. It fell open too easily, and there it was folded neatly, my name written on the outside in his unmistakable handwriting. Claire. That's all it said on the front. No dear, no date, just Claire. My hands trembled. My heart raced. You ever read something you're not sure you're ready for, my friend? Like opening a door, won't close the same way again. The letter was short. Not a confession. Not a goodbye. Just him. Claire, I don't know how to say any of this in person. Maybe I'm a coward. Maybe I'm just scared I'll change my mind if I look at you again. I'm leaving before the end of summer. I've known that since June, but I didn't want it to be real. You made me forget for a while. Thank you for that. There are things I still can't explain about my mother, about the way I grew up, about why I always feel like I'm borrowing time. But you made it feel like that time belonged to me, just for a little while. You're the only person I've ever met who looks at the world like it's telling a story. I hope you keep doing that. I hope you look back on this summer and see more light than shadow. Eli, that was it. No return address. No clue where he was going. No promise to write. I sat there holding the pages for what felt like hours. My knees pulled to my chest. The attic smelled like dust and pine and rain-warped wood. I read it again and again. He hadn't said goodbye. Not really, but he was gone. I knew that with a kind of ache that doesn't come from logic, only instinct. You know, there's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It hums. It stays under your skin like a song you can't quite forget. I didn't cry. Not then. I folded the letter back into the book and placed it beneath my pillow. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was already on a train, already on a road I'd never follow. The next day, I walked to the chapel. I didn't expect him to be there, and he wasn't. But I sat in our usual place anyway. Let the colours wash over me. The window looked the same. But I noticed, maybe for the first time, a tiny hairline crack in the lower pane of blue glass. It felt like the light had changed. Or maybe I had. Dear one, have you ever felt someone slip through your life like sand through fingers? No matter how tightly you hold on, they're already on the wind. That was Eli. I didn't see him again that summer, but I still carried the letter with me folded and hidden like something sacred. A promise that wasn't a promise. A farewell without a wave. And still, it meant everything. The mornings after he left were the hardest. The kind of mornings that came heavy, like thick clouds hanging over the town. You ever wake up and know instantly something is missing? That was me. I still went to the chapel, still walked the same dirt path, dust rising around my ankles, the sun low and gold in the sky. My feet moved out of habit, like they were trying to pretend the world hadn't shifted under them. And inside, everything looked the same. The wooden pews still creaked. The stained glass still scattered its kaleidoscope across the floor. But it felt abandoned. Not by God, maybe, but by something sacred, just the same. I'd sit in the pew where we used to sit, my notebook in my lap, pencil unmoving. There was nothing I wanted to draw, nothing that could hold the weight of that kind of quiet. Sometimes I talked to him in my head, imagined him sitting beside me, legs stretched out, arms crossed, that small, amused smirk on his face. You always take things so seriously, he used to tease. And I'd roll my eyes, but secretly I loved that he noticed. Without him, time seemed to lose its shape. The chapel felt colder, though the sun still came in. The colours still danced on the floor, but they felt like they belonged to someone else. One morning, I noticed a spiderweb in the corner of the stained glass, fine and shimmering. I hadn't seen it before. Maybe I hadn't looked. It struck me how life kept spinning even in silence. Even in loss, I stopped bringing my sketch pad. I stopped looking for his shadow in the corners, but I kept going. Every day, like some part of me was waiting, or hoping, or just didn't know where else to be. The town moved around me like a slow river. People I barely knew smiled kindly, asked if I was enjoying my summer. I nodded, said yes, said, "It's beautiful here." But inside, my chest felt like a hollow room with no echo. My aunt noticed, of course. She said nothing, bless her. Just made me stronger tea in the mornings. Let me sleep in later. One day, she handed me a scarf she'd knitted. Said, "The mornings get cold." That was her way of saying, "I see you." The chapel, too, began to show its age. A crack in the pew I hadn't noticed before. A bit of paint flaking from the far wall. The Windham window still held strong, but I could see the edges beginning to dull, the lead lines beginning to bow. It felt like the place was grieving with me. Or maybe I just projected that onto it because I needed something to share the weight. Do you know what I mean, dear listener? When a place becomes a mirror? One afternoon, I stood up in the chapel and shouted. Just once. Loud and cracked. My voice echoed off the rafters. And for a moment, it sounded like he might answer. But silence swallowed it whole. I felt foolish afterward, embarrassed, even though no one had heard. But maybe that's what grief looks like when you're 17. Not tears, not poems, just noise. Just wanting someone, anyone, to hear you. I still had the letter. I'd unfold it late at night, read the same lines again, memorised the loop of his handwriting. I never told anyone about it. Not then. It was mine. And somehow, it still felt like a connection. Like he might walk back through that chapel door one day, brush the dust from the seat beside me, and say, "Hey." But he didn't. And with every day that passed, I let go a little more. Not of the memory, but of the expectation. Some loves are meant to stay. Others are meant to pass through you like light, colouring everything for just a moment. The last week in that little town moved like fog slow, quiet, and impossible to hold. I counted the days without meaning to, like watching a candle burn down when you don't want to lose the light. I no longer expected to see him, but somehow I still looked. Every corner I turned, every tree I passed, I half hoped he'd be there. Isn't that strange? Even when your heart knows the answer, your eyes still search. I spent more time at the chapel than anywhere else. My aunt would ask if I wanted to visit the lake or the bakery. or the weekend market. I smiled, said maybe tomorrow, but I never went. I needed to be near that window. I began sketching again. Not him. I couldn't. It hurt too much. But the window, yes. I drew it over and over. The way the colours spilled like ink. The way the light shifted with the hour. I wanted to remember the light more than the pain. That's what I told myself. If I could capture that, maybe everything else would feel less like loss and more like beauty. I also started writing letters. Letters I never planned to send. Today, I saw a bird land on your spot. I remembered the way you used to tilt your head when you were thinking. I wish we had more time. I folded them neatly, tucked them into the pages of my sketchbook. Words for the silence. One afternoon, I brought a jar of paintbrushes to the chapel. I had this strange urge to give something back. I painted the base of the window's stone frame. Tiny vines and stars in pale gold. Nothing dramatic. Just something small. A mark that said, I was here. I think I wanted to believe that if he ever came back, he'd see it and know I hadn't forgotten, that some part of me had stayed. The night before I left, I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window in my aunt's house, listening to the soft hum of summer insects. The moonlight spilled across my floor, cool and blue, and I cried, quietly. Not the loud kind, not the sobbing kind. Just a long, slow ache sliding down my cheeks. Because I knew I was leaving behind something that couldn't come with me. A version of myself. A summer that didn't belong to the world beyond that chapel window. I whispered a goodbye into the night. Not just to him, but to the light, to the stillness, to the girl I was becoming and wouldn't quite be again. In the morning, my bags were packed. My aunt hugged me tight, said, "Come back next year." And I promised her I would. But even then, I knew I wouldn't. Not because I didn't love it, but because that place would never be the same. Not without him. The train ride back to the city was quiet. My aunt had packed me a sandwich and a thermos of tea, but I didn't touch either. I kept my sketchbook on my lap, flipping through pages of colour and light and empty spaces. Spaces where his face should have been. You know that strange ache, my dear friend? The one that sits not in your chest exactly, but somewhere deeper between the ribs, like a whisper caught under the skin. That's what it felt like. That summer lived there, tucked just behind my heart. Back in the city, everything moved faster. I had college applications to finish, friends to catch up with, chores to do, expectations to meet. I smiled when people asked how my summer went. It was quiet, I'd say. Lovely weather, lots of reading. That was all. No one asked about the chapel. No one asked about him. And I didn't offer. I'd try to sketch the window from memory sometimes. At first, the colours came easily. But the more I tried to make it perfect, the more it slipped from me. like trying to hold water in cupped hands. There were new boys. Of course there were. Funny ones, smart ones, beautiful ones. But none of them looked at the world like he did. None of them looked at me like he did, as if I was some mystery worth unfolding slowly, without tearing the paper. I went on dates, laughed, kissed a boy under a neon sign outside a diner once. But afterward, all I could think was how harsh the light had been, how flat, how unlike stained glass. My friends thought I was just picky. Maybe I was. Or maybe once you've known a kind of quiet magic, it ruins you for ordinary spark. I went to college, studied art history, then literature. I buried myself in stories, loved the ones where things almost worked out, the ones that lingered in what if. And yes, I dated again, fell in love. A different kind of love-strong, dependable, real. The kind that picks you up from the airport and holds your hand when your father gets sick. But I never told him about the boy from the chapel. Not really. I mentioned a summer once, vaguely, but left out the light. The kiss, the ache. We moved into a small apartment with big windows and peeling paint. I bought a stained glass sun catcher at a flea market and hung it where the morning light came through. It wasn't the same, but sometimes it cast a sliver of blue across the floor, and for just a second, I was 17 again. Do you ever do that, my friend? Keep little reminders hidden in plain sight. Not to mourn exactly, but to remember who you were. Sometimes I avoided churches, not out of anger or fear, but because I didn't want to see other windows. I didn't want to compare. None of them ever looked the same. The light never fell quite right. And yet, sometimes, I dreamed of that chapel. In my sleep, I'd find myself walking its aisle again, the pews empty, dust floating like tiny stars. I'd turn to the window, and he'd be there, not I, 17 anymore, just older, like me, and always he'd smile, that small, quiet smile, the one that said you remember too, years pass. They always do, don't they? Faster than you think, slower than you feel. Life builds itself like layers of dust on windowsills, quiet, unnoticed, inevitable. I married a kind man, a practical one, the kind who remembered to warm my coffee cup before pouring it, the kind who left notes on the fridge with small hearts in the corner, love in its grown-up shape. We had children too, one with his eyes, one with mine. And in the chaos of sleep schedules, piano lessons, birthday balloons, and scraped knees, I almost forgot that chapel. Almost. But some memories, dear friend, they live like shadows under sunlight. They never fully leave. One winter, when the children were still small, and we'd just put up the tree, I received a postcard. No envelope, just a simple cream-coloured card, slightly worn at the corners. It had a sketch of a small chapel. Not ours, but similar. The ink strokes were familiar. My heart jumped before I even turned it over. There was no signature, no return address. Only one sentence written in that same soft, deliberate hand. The light here is nothing like yours. That was all. I stood at the kitchen counter, fingers trembling, reading it again and again. And I swear, for a second, I could smell the dust of that chapel, could hear the faint creak of pews, the rustle of pages in his sketchbook. I never told my husband. What could I say? Someone I loved once sent me a message across time. What would that change? Instead, I slipped the postcard into my own sketchbook, the one from that summer, still tucked in a drawer beneath sweaters I never wore. Every now and then, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, I'd pull it out, flip through those old pages, feel 17 again, let my heart ache a little. The silence between us became a kind of music, a gentle hum. No new letters came, no clues. But somehow I knew he was out there, sketching, travelling, looking at light in new places. And part of me, just a small part, believed that maybe he thought of me too. There were moments, you see, when a certain kind of light would hit my kitchen floor, refracting through a chipped glass I'd set on the windowsill, and I'd freeze, just for a heartbeat, and wonder if, at that exact moment, he'd paused somewhere too. Maybe he saw a window in Prague, or Florence, or tucked in a little town in Portugal, and maybe he smiled. The way he used to. We never said goodbye properly. But perhaps some goodbyes stretch across time, linger like sun flares on film. You don't have to speak them to feel them. Some nights I dreamed we met again, not as 17-year-olds, but as who we were now older, weathered, softened at the edges. And in the dreams there were no questions, just a quiet understanding, a glance, a hand brushing mine, and that warm silence between two people who once loved deeply and never forgot. Let me tell you something I once read. Dear love, real love isn't loud. It doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives like dust motes in the sunbeam, floating there as if they'd always been, and maybe always will. And sometimes, love comes in pieces. I married David when I was 27. He was not like him, not like the boy with ink-stained fingers and that storm in his eyes. David was calm water, a man with both feet planted firmly in the soil of this world. He made me laugh, brought me soup when I was sick, listened when I cried without knowing why. When we kissed, it was slow and familiar, like turning the pages of a book I already loved. But on our wedding day, when I looked in the mirror as the veil settled around my shoulders, I felt it. That missing piece. The stained glass light. The flicker of a memory not yet gone. Have you ever loved two people differently, but truly? one who broke your heart open and one who held the pieces gently. Our life together was good, solid. We bought a house with green shutters and a creaky porch swing. He planted tomatoes in the spring. I painted the nursery in soft yellow before our daughter arrived. There were dinners with friends, school plays, laundry folded with music humming in the background, and quiet nights where we sat side by side reading, our feet touching under the blanket. But sometimes, when the light slanted in through the window just right, and the room turned gold, I'd think of a boy with a sketch pad and a chapel and a kiss that tasted like summer. I kept those thoughts folded small, like old letters. Tucked deep inside, I never let them grow large enough to bloom, because I loved David, truly, and he deserved all of me. Still, memory has a way of sneaking in during the softest moments. During a slow dance in the kitchen, during an evening rain, during that half sleep when the world goes quiet and the heart whispers louder. I think I became many women over the years. A mother, a wife, a teacher, a friend, but always, I, the girl who once sat in the coloured light of an old chapel and listened to a boy hum as he drew. Even David knew, I think. Not the details, not the name, but he sensed there was a part of me that belonged to a summer long before him. He never asked, never needed to. He just loved the woman I was, and I loved him for that. When our son was born, I remember watching David hold him for the first time, the baby's tiny hand curling around his finger. And I cried. Not just because I was overwhelmed, but because in that moment I knew I had chosen the right life. Even if a part of me would always belong to a different one. Some nights, when everyone was asleep, I'd sit by the window with a glass of wine and look out into the dark. I'd wonder where he was, what he was seeing, whether the stars above him were the same ones above me. And in those moments, I'd whisper just softly, "I remember you." Not out of regret, but reverence. Because some loves don't fade. They don't demand. They just live in the quiet corners of who we become. So I loved in pieces, but wholly. And perhaps that's the only way we truly can. Grief doesn't always come in sobs or silence. Sometimes it arrives in a grocery aisle. When you reach for the cereal you always bought for him. Sometimes it hides in a half-worn sweater you forgot to donate, or in a voice message you can't bear to delete. David died in his sleep. Peacefully, they said, as if that was supposed to comfort me. As if the absence of struggle made the absence of him any easier to carry. The children were grown by then. Our daughter had moved to Portland with her wife. Our son overseas, always chasing the next startup. They came back for the funeral, of course. Their eyes hollow with jet lag and sadness. And afterward, the silence grew. The house, once full of footsteps and laughter, began to echo. There's a strange thing that happens when you no longer have to be someone's someone. You remember who you used to be, or maybe who you still are beneath it all. I started walking more, through parks, down to the waterfront, sometimes to the old library. Not to borrow books just to sit, just to be near stories, other people's memories, safer than my own. One morning, I was dusting the top shelf in our closet when a sketchbook fell. Not David's, mine, from long ago. My hand trembled as I flipped through it, and there it was. The chapel window, captured in pencil and faded colours, slanted sunlight, that heart-shaped pane in the centre. And suddenly, dear friend, I couldn't breathe. Not because of grief, but because of longing, not for him, not entirely, but for her. The girl I had once been, with dust on her knees and hope in her chest and ink smudged on her fingertips. Have you ever felt that? Not just the ache for someone you lost, but for the version of yourself you left behind with them? That evening, I poured a glass of wine, stood by the window, and watched the last bit of sun fall through the blinds. It wasn't the same as chapel light. Not even close. I made the decision quietly. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just a whisper to myself. It's time to go back. The town hadn't changed much when I arrived. A new coffee shop where the hardware store used to be. A bookstore still hanging on, bless its soul. And the chapel? Oh, my friend. The moment I saw it, my knees nearly gave. There it stood, weathered, quiet, like it had been waiting for me all these years. The door creaked as I opened it. Inside, the dust swirled like little ghosts. And then the light. That same coloured light pouring through the stained glass, painting the pews, touching my face. I sat in the same spot. Third pew from the front left side, where the blue and green light mingled. And I wept. Not for David, not for him, but for the strange, beautiful, unbearable gift of memory. Sometimes we return not to find something, but to remember that we once had it. I stayed for hours. Let the light move across my skin like a benediction. And when I finally stood, ready to go, I noticed something strange. In the small wooden donation box by the door, a notebook, old, leather-bound. My hands shook as I picked it up, because somehow, even before I opened it, I knew it was his. I didn't open it right away. The notebook, I mean. My fingers rested on the worn leather cover as if it might vanish the moment I blinked. It was real, heavy with time, with silence. I sat back down, the same pew, same place, and gently opened the first page. His handwriting hit me like a tide. Slanted, quick strokes, I could hear his voice in every curve of ink. I hadn't realised how well I'd memorised it. Or maybe I had, but I'd buried that knowing somewhere deep. It wasn't a diary, not exact. More like fragments, sketches, bits of poems, scribbled thought, things he never said aloud, at least not to me. There were drawings too, the chapel window from every angle, the lake shaded with soft pencil lines, a hand holding a feather, my face drawn in pieces, my smile here, my eyes on another page, the curve of my jaw in shadow. It was like he'd been trying to hold on to me the only way he knew how, through lines and light and graphite. And then near the back a note, if you ever come back, I hope you see the light again. I hope it touches your face. I hope it reminds you we were real. No name, no signature, but it didn't need one. I would have known those words in any universe. He had come back. He'd sat in this very room, maybe even this very spot. Long before me, long after we'd gone our separate ways. Have you ever felt something settle in your chest? Like a puzzle piece you didn't even know was missing, finally sliding into place? I held the notebook to my heart, closed my eyes. The sunlight kept shifting, dancing through the glass. Yellow, then blue, then soft pink across the wooden floor. Time had moved, but here it felt like it paused for us. Just for a moment, as if the chapel had saved something sacred. Not just light, but memory. I wondered how many times he'd return, if he ever saw the paint peeling on the windowsill, if he noticed the tiny crack in the third pane that hadn't been there the summer we met. Or maybe he'd only come once, left the notebook, and never came back again. That thought, that quiet, haunting maybe, it stayed with me. But so did the warmth, the knowing that he had thought of me, that I had lived, still, in some soft part of his mind. Isn't that a kind of love too? The kind that doesn't demand presence or permanence? Just remembrance. I tucked the notebook into my bag, not to take it away, but to keep it safe, to read again later, maybe over tea, maybe when the nights feel long and the house feels emptier than usual. And as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something I hadn't noticed before, a small, almost imperceptible mark in the window, a crack shaped like a heart. I stepped closer, touched it gently. It hadn't been there last time, or if it had, I hadn't seen it. Now, it caught the light just right, almost glowing. And I thought, my dear friend, maybe he left that for me too. Not just the sketches, not just the words, but a message in the glass itself. A reminder that love, no matter how brief, leaves a mark. The crack was delicate a thread, thin and curving, yet unmistakably heart-shaped. It hadn't been made by accident, I was sure of that. It rested at the bottom corner of the central stained glass panel, where the light turned gold every morning. And now, even with the sun slanting low in the sky, it caught the light like it had something to say. I pressed my fingertip to the glass, tracing the little curve as if it might pulse beneath my touch. I whispered into the silence, "Did you make this for me?" Of course, there was no answer. Just the hum of the world beyond the chapel walls. But I felt it. The echo. The answer that didn't need words. It was strange, wasn't it? To come all this way for closure, only to find that love, even in its absence, had left behind breadcrumbs. Like it wanted to be remembered. Like it didn't want to be buried in the dust of growing older. The chapel was empty, but I could hear us, the re-17, and breathless, laughing about nothing. The scuff of his sneakers on the floor, the way he used to hold his pencil between his teeth while flipping pages. I stepped back, looked at the window in full. The heart-shaped crack was nearly invisible from a distance, like a secret only visible up close. And maybe that's what it was something meant only for me. A little flicker in the glass to say, I was here. You were here. And it mattered. We never promised each other forever. We never spoke of the future in anything but shrugs and soft maybes. But this window, that crack, his notebook, the sunlight, it all felt like a kind of promise that had held on longer than either of us expected. I sat again, letting the late light spill across my lap. The colours had changed since morning. Richer now, more amber than gold. A soft reminder that time doesn't stop, not even in places we hold sacred. And still there was this glow, not just from the window, but from within. That kind of love, the quiet kind, the summer kind, the young kind, that never quite dies, it leaves marks we can't always see until we come back to them. He had left me a message, not a letter, not a grand gesture, just a crack in the glass, a shape so small it could have been missed by anyone else. But not me, never me. And as I sat there, I whispered to him, not out loud, but where only the light could hear. I saw it. I remember. Thank you. The window, the notebook, the chapel. They had held our story longer than we ever did. And now, with dusk curling at the edges of the sky, I felt something let go inside me. Not him, not the memory, just the ache. And in its place, peace. There's something sacred about letting go. Not forgetting, my dear friend, no, never that. But loosening your grip on the past just enough to let it float beside you, instead of pressing down on your chest like a stone. That's how it felt, sitting on that old wooden pew. The sun, filtering through the stained glass, painted my lap in hues of violet and rose. I didn't cry. I thought I might. I'd brought tissues, just in case. But all I did was breathe. Slowly, fully. The chapel creaked with the weight of time, and I could almost hear the echoes of the years settling into its beams. everything was older, more cracked, more faded, but also kinder somehow, as if the place had softened with age, the same way we do. I looked up at the window one last time. The heart-shaped crack gleamed faintly in the late sun, like a wink. I smiled, and it didn't feel sad. Just real. Just honest. You know, I used to think love only counted if it lasted. If it made it through the storms and the jobs and the children and the fights and the illnesses. But that summer, that boy, that window, they taught me that some loves are meant to bloom and fade like fireflies. Brief. Beautiful. Enough. It wasn't about what we could have been if life had let us stay together. It was about who we were in that light, in that moment. Two young souls finding each other in silence and colour. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. I stood, brushed off my skirt, and walked toward the door. The floorboards creaked the same way they did when I was 17. I reached the threshold and turned back one last time. "Goodbye," I whispered. Not to him. Not exactly. But to the girl I was. To the ache I'd carried. To the quiet kind of love that lingers in stained glass and memory. Outside, the air was warm. Summer had settled gently over the town. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. As I walked away, the sun hit the window just right. For a moment, I could swear I saw our silhouettes there, mine and his, side by side, laughing, glowing, forever young in the light. And that's where I'll keep him, in the golden fragments of memory, in the hush of a chapel, in the soft warmth that touches my cheek every time the sun sets just right. Some love isn't meant to be lived forever. But oh, my friend, it is meant to be remembered, always.